Happy half birthday to me and 6-month anniversary of the Savvy Luminary. Oh my goodness, we made it, committing to weekly episodes for the last 6 months. So please join me in this special celebration episode where we cover all of the wins and lessons for the last 6 months. Hey everybody, it's Leslie Tagorda, your brand astrologer and designer here. And in this special episode, our 6-month anniversary episode, we are going to be covering a lot of fun things. We're going to be covering why celebrating is so important in our businesses. I'll also be sharing 6 lessons that we've learned from 6 months of podcasting. Then we're going to jump into the astrology of the week, which covers a special and powerful new moon in Leo happening on August 18th. And then we'll go through the rest of the powerful astrology. I'm sure you've already been feeling either the frustration or the drive, or maybe a little bit of both. So I'm recording this podcast on August 14th, and you'll be hearing it a little bit later. But 6 months ago exactly, on February 14th, it was my birthday. And so I decided for that particular birthday, I was going to throw a big, epic party to celebrate the launch of my biggest project to date. So in the last 6 months, of this podcast, there have been about, 4,200 downloads and counting. And yeah, maybe it's a lot of downloads, maybe it's a little downloads. It's actually right in the middle. We've produced 32 episodes. So even though this is episode 30, we've had a couple of bonus episodes. And right now we're averaging about 700 downloads a month and growing. Again, I'm not here to talk about the metrics in order to brag, because I know that there are a lot of metrics, a lot of podcasts that have bigger followings, have more downloads, even at this crucial kind of 6-month juncture. But I'm doing this because I am here to celebrate wins. So let's talk celebrating wins. Why do we celebrate wins? Actually, before we talk about why we celebrate wins, let's talk about why people don't celebrate wins, right? I know I have a bunch of friends who don't like to celebrate their birthday, or they don't like to acknowledge that they got a raise, or they don't like to acknowledge that they made some major milestone in their business. And even with my clients, I'm always pushing my clients every week on Friday, because it's Venus Day and we like to be grateful on Venus Day, to say, hey, what have you accomplished? What was a win for this week? So I'm curious to know, do you celebrate wins or do you avoid them? Now, celebrating wins, hopefully this is going to change your mind, because celebrating wins is super, super important. Celebrating wins in our business has a twofold effect. The first effect is just purely the law of attraction and abundance, right? Whatever you celebrate grows. So the universe, if you want to talk about God, and I like to think about like our spirituality and our highest self as kind of the universe. So I'll use that term right here, the universe. The universe hears us through ritual. And a celebration like, blowing out a birthday cake or going to a wedding and throwing flowers, those are celebration rituals. And it essentially tells the universe that you are here and listening and communicating to the universe and celebrating something that you want to plant a seed of intention. So when we celebrate a win, like going to drinks with friends on a Friday after you get a raise or something, you're essentially cheersing to the universe and showing your appreciation and gratitude, right? You're invoking the law of attraction and the law of abundance to continue to shower you with those kinds of blessings. Now, the second reason why we celebrate wins, especially in business and entrepreneurship, is because it allows us to reflect and optimize on growing our success, on growing what has worked, right? So again, like I always ask my clients and people in my Luminary Rising membership on Fridays, what were your wins? What were your aha moments? What were your accomplishments? It's really important to spend just a little bit of time going over everything that you have done and created and celebrating in community so that we can also celebrate with you, especially in that kind of like group format. And even if it seems that you've had a really rough week, I'm sure if you dig deep enough, you can find something worthy of celebrating. Again, when you celebrate, this law of abundance checks in, your appreciation grows, your gratitude grows, your empathy grows, your love grows. So, yeah, your vibration grows, and you can become the magnet to more of those blessings. All right. So, to celebrate our wins for 6 months of podcasting, right? So, when I first started out with podcasting, I knew that I was committing for the long haul. I knew that this wasn't going to be a short game. Normally, kind of what I've realized about my message and my voice and me as a projector is that I haven't really experienced yet those kinds of viral moments or those kinds of things where all of a sudden something that I says just instantly catches fire. So I wasn't planning on having my content just like boom, catch on fire. Then all of a sudden I would have like millions of followers and thousands of downloads per episode. I wish. I know that's not my design. So I was here in it for the long haul. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to, number one lesson, have a good plan and then allow it to go with the flow. So before 6 months, we launched in 6 months, but this has probably been about a 12-month dream. So I remember in January, before launching the podcast, I had hired a podcast planner, an amazing business run by Esther Littlefield. She has a business called Morningstar Media, and she helps produce podcasts and plan podcasts. We had people in-house, my trustee, I call him my assistant, but gosh, he's so much more than my assistant. Jeff, my right-hand man, he was going to produce everything. So we wanted to have a really good plan so that we could embark on this journey, having packed all the things that we needed so that we could be prepared for everything. Right? So we hired a podcast planner, and she gave us all of the tools and all the resources and all of these checklists so that we could get everything done and set up the podcast on a solid foundation, and then have a system so that we could have, weekly themes. And I'll get into that a little bit later. And so now that we had a good plan, we were really able to start producing these podcasts individually, these episodes. And I'm actually glad we don't have like an outsourced producer, because an outsourced producer would require me to give podcast episodes a few weeks in advance. And as I mentioned, I'm recording this on the Friday before it drops on Sunday. I'm not really a good person that can create content in the future, because I'm always playing off the energy of the day. And because my podcast content, astrology, is so timely and thematic, I need to have a flexible system that I can go with the flow. So lesson one, have a good plan and then allow yourself to go with the flow. And going with the flow is different for every person. Number two lesson that we're celebrating is that I made a commitment. Earlier, I mentioned that when I decided to create this podcast, I knew I wanted it to be weekly, and I knew that I was in it for the long haul versus wanting an overnight success. I also joined a community of podcasters on Facebook. There's an amazing podcast community called She Podcasts. And the people there are so supportive. A friend and colleague and fellow masterminder who has her own amazing podcast, the Shameless Mom Academy, Sarah Dean, gave me so much advice when I was starting out on this journey. And she taught me to really value each and every download. Because in the beginning, the downloads started off slowly. And I mean, they're not like, it's not like I have this like viral podcast yet, right? But she said, this takes time. She said, even me in the beginning, and, her podcast is now a few years old. It also gets money from advertising and everything. But she started small as well. well. And she just kept on going. And she said, recognize that each and every download means that a person actually listened and heard and received the wisdom that I'm here to share. So yes, celebrating each and every download. It doesn't matter how many people are getting, how many downloads are happening. It just matters that there are people that are receiving the information that I want to share. Number 3 lesson is that in creating this podcast, I am personally living out my brand values. So some of my brand values are that to function in this perfectly imperfect world, right? To move and to create and not wait until something is perfect, because there is no such thing as perfect. So I've had to let go of my perfection. Like you'll hear me maybe say ums or repeat myself or tongue twist, and I'll depend on Jeff to kind of catch certain things, but there's nothing perfect. Every single podcast episode that I finish recording and I hand it off to Jeff, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm totally incoherent. I don't think this made any sense. And then he turns it around and he's like, oh my gosh, this made so much sense. I loved it so much. And maybe he's being nice, but I really truly believe that we just have to move forward and take imperfect action, because only through our action do we get to clarify and make things better. So don't let yourself, get stopped by perfection. The other brand value that, I hope to grow in you as well as in my clients is that to understand and work in your own genius. The last few episodes that I shared about, earning $10,000 in 5 days was because I was working in my own genius. And so even with this podcast, I really strive to work in my own genius. Like we record these podcasts so I can show it on video, because I know that people enjoy watching me talk. I know that my voice isn't one of these big and boomy voices, and that I really appreciate slow and soft power. So instead of getting, I listen to other podcasts with really energizing music and all these like sound effects. I'm like, woohoo, it's so exciting and there's so many shiny things. And then all of a sudden I'm like, get comparison, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, should I change my music for my podcast? Should I do this? Should I do that? But then I focus in on my own genius and focus in on my own particular energy. And I know that I'm here to be the soothing and calming voice of soft power in our entrepreneurship journey. Another part of my brand values is learning from our mistakes. Similar to being perfectly imperfect, it's that, I understand that this process isn't going to be smooth. I understand that people are going to love my podcast or they're not going to like my podcast, or I'm going to, have some failures, or rather, like I mentioned this, I don't believe in failures, experiments, and I'm constantly learning and growing from them. And the last of my brand values that I bring into this podcast is something that I've already mentioned about making a commitment. So that is one of my big brand values, is that I am committing to myself. If I don't commit to myself, nobody else is going to commit. I learned this really, pretty late in life, maybe just about 5 or 6 years ago, when I was, dating and kind of wishing that I had a husband, had a life partner. And I realized that I wasn't committing to myself, and how it was being reflected back to me was that men were not committing to me. And so I know that's kind of like out in the left field about like, okay, but we're talking about business. But since then, what I've learned is that when I commit to my goals and continue to consistently show up, yes, burnout happens. Yes, things may not always go your way, but after a little bit of rest and restoration, getting up again and doing it all over, committing to the ultimate goal instead of just turning around and saying, this is too hard, I give up. I am not a giver upper. So the fourth lesson for celebrating our podcast is that we learn to create a system. One of the best things about creating this podcast and dedicating to it on a weekly basis is that each and every podcast informs all of my social for that week. It follows the astrology of the season, and it also informs all of my teachings in my membership Luminary Rising, as well as my group content in my free Facebook group, The Savvy Luminary. It's been so wonderful because I record this one podcast. We have an outline, we have a template, a Google document that then I share with Jeff, and he takes the transcript of this podcast. He pulls out different sound bites. He creates social graphics from it. We can create 10 pieces of content from this one podcast. It has really upped our efficiency and our ability to crank out great content for you here on this podcast as well as on social media. Next lesson, our fifth lesson about celebrating our wins, is having a team. Success doesn't happen on your own. I've already talked about Jeff and how he is such an important part of my brand. I am a visionary. I am an idea person. I have all these great ideas. I love to create content, but after creating content, I'm already on to the next thing, right? So I depend on Jeff to do all of my production, to do all of my implementations. And he and I have just, we've been working together for so long. We're such a great team. And so for you, if, no matter where you are in your business, even if you're just starting out, it's really important to not do everything on your own. Even if you think that you don't have enough money to hire somebody, it's really important to find somebody that fills the gaps, right? That fills the holes in your zone of excellence or your zone of competence, the things that you're not that great at, and outsource them. You're gonna go farther, faster, and make more money sooner. The last lesson that we're going to celebrate is learning and optimizing doesn't stop. So after 6 months of producing weekly podcasts, we're consistently trying to figure out how can we make this easier? Because sometimes, oh my gosh, creating all of these notes can take me over an hour before I even start recording. Going through all of the astrology, sometimes, it takes me forever. But at this point, we've gotten things pretty tight. I have my astrology calendar already, all of the important aspects and transits and everything. I have it out through the year, and it really helps me to just hop onto the recording, go to my spreadsheet, look at all the aspects, and just boom, 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 talk all about it. I'm still learning how to optimize my notes just a little bit. And also another thing I wanted to add about the notes and add about the content is that I am not normally creating any content that is completely brand new. I'm building on content that I've already delivered. As you know, I teach astrology for branding and leadership, and I've created a coursework called Crystallize that's a three-pillar coursework about how we can brand using our own astrology. And everything that I create for this podcast comes from something that I've already created in my teachings and learnings. So what's next for the next 6 months? Well, I do have a few goals. So I want to share with you 4 goals for the next 6 months so that we can have another big celebration when we have our 1-year anniversary. And fingers crossed here that I'll be able to throw another party in person so I can finally hug my friends and family. We shall see. I'm not going to hold my breath, but my hope and faith is high. So 4 goals for the next 6 months of the Savvy Luminary. So goal number 1, I'd like to start bringing in more guest interviews. That was one of my missions, and I got so caught up in delivering content every week, that I forgot to bring in more people. We have a guest interview that's coming up because I have met some amazing spiritual entrepreneurs that I would love for you to know. I want to share their stories and their journey about how they got to their current path path and how they stood up to be more visible in their communities. The next goal is I want to get a little bit more structured and planned out with my offerings over the next 6 months. So, most of the times I'll have an offering. I'll encourage you to join my free Facebook group, or I'll let you know about some ways to work with me, like my one-on-one astro brand readings or my membership for driven spiritual entrepreneurs. I want to have a better plan. Like right now, up until now, I've been kind of shooting from the hip, kind of going with the flow and saying, oh, I think I'm going to do this now. Oh, I'm going to do this now. And we're always kind of, reacting and responding instead of having things that are planned out. So that is my goal for the next 6 months. You'll be happy about that, right, Jeff? The next goal is that I desire to get more reviews so that I can get more listeners to this podcast. It seems like something really simple to get a review, right? Apple Podcasts does not make it easy to get reviews, right? On Apple Podcasts, you have to go to the show, you have to scroll all the way down to the very, very bottom before you can rate and review. And even for me, being a podcaster, it's so freaking hard to find that place where you rate and review. But let me just say, if you wanted to get me a gift for this 6-month anniversary of this podcast, I would love your review on Apple Podcast or Stitcher, because every single rating and review amplifies the algorithms that be so that this podcast gets shared, gets visible. When you're like looking at podcasts and it'll say, hey, you might also like this podcast. Well, those podcasts show up because they have high rankings and high reviews. So you can really, really help a woman out like me to get this podcast to be more visible and get more people to hear the wisdom that I share. And also remember, if I read your review on this podcast, I will send you a savvy Luminary gift bag. It's a really cute canvas bag that you can use for your office supplies or you can use for your makeup. And there's some really fun surprises in there. I will mail this to you if I read your review on the podcast. Our fourth goal for the next 6 months is to make time to consciously get on other people's podcasts. Recently, I've been really getting a lot of invites to be on certain people's podcasts, and I am super excited, to share my wisdom and, to get the word out to more people. And I haven't really been mindful about this, like going out and contacting other podcasters who I really love and appreciate to be a guest on their podcast. I'm going to be much better about this in the next 6 months and work it into my monthly systems, because this is really important on growing the visibility of this podcast. So while I said there was 4 goals, I have one big, hairy, scary, audacious goal. I can't say I think. I am. I want to share my process of the self-talk. I am ready to invest in some PR. Yes, I am ready. It sounds very scary. It brings up a lot of things in me, like who am I to talk about business astrology and brand astrology? But I know from working with so many clients and giving so many individual astro brand readings to, to normal people, to influencers, that I have a lot of value to share. So I think the next step, did you hear that talk? The self-doubt talk, I think I've got to get rid of that. I am now ready to invest in some PR. So if you have any recommendations for me, you've worked with PR people before, if you know anybody great, send them my way. I would love to hear. So I hope that all of you have enjoyed learning about the 6 lessons we have learned from our 6-month anniversary. I hope you've enjoyed learning about this new moon in Leo that's coming up. And I would love to hear what you'll be doing for a ritual. And of course, if you want to really give me a gift for this 6-month anniversary, the perfect present would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. All right, until next week, have a great one, everybody. Mahalo for listening to this brand new podcast. If you enjoyed learning about astrology for entrepreneurs, help me spread the word by sharing this podcast with your business besties, and hop over to the Savvy Luminary for links to episode notes and our free Facebook community where you can send me questions about astrology or branding, as well as connect with other like-minded businesses.